International law is absolutely, totally clear when it comes to torture. No one should be tortured. No one, regardless of who they are, regardless of where they are, regardless of whether they are utterly innocent or have committed terrible crimes. And no one should be sent off to face torture somewhere else. No one, anywhere, regardless of who they are, regardless of where they are, regardless of whether they are utterly innocent or have committed terrible crimes. Not deported, not extradited, not transferred in any way. So the message to governments, from governments, they set these standards, is very clear. Do not torture, and do not hand people over to torturers. And what is particularly crucial to highlight is that this fundamental human rights protection is absolute. There are no exceptions, there is no balancing, no limitations. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 60 years ago, no one shall be subjected to torture. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, 40 years ago, no one shall be subjected to torture. The Convention on the Rights of the Child, 20 years ago, no child shall be subjected to torture. And the Convention Against Torture, also 20 years ago, no exceptional circumstances whatsoever, whether a state of war or a threat of war, internal political instability or any other public emergency, may be invoked as a justification of torture. But most worrying of all is the simple assertion now that we hear more and more that torture should sometimes be tolerated, especially if it might catch a terrorist or thwart a terrorist attack. A variant of the ticking time bomb scenario. Police have someone in custody who they believe has information about an impending terrorist attack. Why not let them torture the individual to get that information? Isn't the torture of one person worth it if it might save the lives of many? Well, absolutely not. We cannot allow it for any number of reasons. First, it's fallacious. Torture doesn't work. You don't get good information that way. Secondly, where would we draw the line? You torture the person who knows about the terrorist attack. Do you get to torture their sister, their neighbor? But most importantly, we need to say no because we need to say no. Torture is fundamentally wrong. It keeps us trapped in a world of violence begetting more violence, a world which creates more fear, more repression, more victims, more marginalization, more insecurity. Canadian law does not include an absolute, unequivocal ban on deporting individuals to a situation where they would be at serious risk of torture. Instead, Canadian law leaves open the possibility of such deportations when the government asserts that the person concerned poses a risk to security. Unfortunately, that's been upheld by our Supreme Court of Canada in the 2002 Serres case, which did conclude that as a general rule, such deportations shouldn't go ahead, but that there might be exceptional circumstances which would arise justifying such deportations. And Canada cannot, should not, must not ever be complicit in torture. It is wrong because it violates a number of our binding international human rights obligations, and Canada is a nation that must stand behind our obligations, must faithfully comply with those obligations. We cannot be lawless when it comes to international human rights standards. And finally, it's wrong because it undermines the crucial global struggle against torture. If a country such as Canada is not prepared to stand up against torture, say no to torture, and refuse to cooperate with torturers, how can we ever expect others to follow suit? The United Nations has repeatedly called on Canada to amend its laws and ensure that there is absolute protection against deportation to torture in Canada. The UN Human Rights Committee has made that call 2 times. The UN Committee Against Torture has made that call 2 times. Well, it is time to do what the United Nations has asked Canada to do. It is time to do the right thing. It is time to make it clear in Canadian law, in very binding, unequivocal terms, that Canada will not, in any circumstances, deport anyone to a risk of torture.